The first sound was not a sound at all. It was the absence between two thoughts, a pause so deep it felt alive. I was alone in the librarium of Tarsus Prime, surrounded by the silent breath of dust and data scrolls. When the silence changed its shape, it made me aware of myself. At first I thought it was fatigue, weeks without rest, passing forbidden transmissions from the segmentum obscurus. But then I noticed it, the faint distortion in the air, like heat shimmer without warmth. Words formed where none should exist, not heard but known. You are listening already. My heart froze. The phrase didn't echo in my ears, but unfolded behind my thoughts, a whisper beneath language itself. I dropped the data slate. It clattered against marble and woke the soundless chamber, but the whisper persisted, undisturbed by the noise of the real. For a moment, I told myself it was just the warp bleed, static interference. But deep down, I knew better. The warp does not whisper unless it's listening back. I tried to move, my body responded, but my mind lagged. The walls seemed to ripple like painted flesh, the golden aquila carved above the archives watching me now, its twin heads weeping molten tears. The light flickered, and in that flicker I saw it, the faint silhouette of a hand, pressed against the fabric of space. No features, only intent. But that was only the beginning. I left the chamber. I shouldn't have looked back, but I did. The handprint had not vanished. It had grown, and as I fled, the air behind me trembled with laughter that wasn't laughter at all. The sound of memory folding in on itself. That night, I dreamed of a sea made of screams. Each wave carried the faces of those who once thought they understood the warp, inquisitors, psychers, soldiers, all swallowed by what they dared to name. I woke to the taste of copper in my mouth, and a faint sigil burned into the skin of my wrist, glowing like a dying ember. I hadn't seen it before, but it felt earned. The whisper returned, clearer this time. Do not fear us. We are the mirror you refuse to see. I wanted to tear my mind apart, to erase the memory of that tone, calm, knowing, infinite, because it didn't sound like one voice anymore. It sounded like me, 1,000 reflections of my thoughts, harmonized in madness. I began recording these events, thinking perhaps I could understand them through logic. But every time I replayed the vox log, new words appeared that I had not spoken. The message rewrote itself as I listened. And then, the whisper changed. We are not coming. We are already here. The vox shut itself off. And I understood, at last, the first truth of chaos. It does not invade, it awakens. The vox shut itself off. And I understood, at last, the first truth of chaos. It does not invade, it awakens. But what woke inside me that night was not meant to be awake. At first it was only dreams, a slow dripping sound in the dark, like time melting through the cracks of reality. Then came the echoes, my own voice, speaking back from moments that hadn't yet happened. When I closed my eyes, I could feel the thought itself moving. Something inside me had learned to crawl, but that was only the beginning. The mark on my wrist pulsed faintly beneath the skin, as if a heart had begun to beat where none should exist. Each throb matched the rhythm of a whisper I could not unhear. The words were soft, almost compassionate. Do not fear, we remember you. That tone was worse than hatred. It was love twisted into hunger. I sought counsel from Magos Virel, a sanctioned psyker, who claimed to have gazed upon the sea of souls and survived. His eyes were burned white from it, twin pearls of blindness. When I told him about the mark, he did not move. He only whispered one thing: if you can hear the warp, it means the warp can hear you. The candles around us shuddered. The shadows deepened until the flame's glow seemed swallowed by its own light. Then, in one motion, Virel's head turned toward me though he could not see, and he smiled like a man who had already drowned. Do you think you were chosen? He asked. No, I said. I think I was noticed. He laughed, not as a man, but as a vessel being emptied. That night, the mark opened. It did not bleed, it breathed. I could feel air moving beneath my flesh, as if a mouth had formed beneath the skin. The smell was salt and rust, the scent of a dead ocean. I pressed my hand to the wound, and for a heartbeat, for one impossible moment, I felt another hand press back. I screamed. The room didn't echo. Sound died before reaching the walls, and then the whispers returned, layered and soft, like parchment rubbed against bone. The warp is not outside you. It never was. You carry its reflection in your mind. Something in that truth broke me, because I realized all the prayers, all the wards, all the icons of the Emperor, they weren't protected. They were blindfolds, and I had just taken mine off. The air shimmered again, the walls flexed, not like matter but like memory. I reached for my Auspex recorder, but the runes were already rewriting themselves in dynamite script. A single phrase repeated endlessly across the screen. We see you. The warp was breathing again, and in that breath, something spoke my name. It spoke my name the way a blade touches skin. Testing. Curious, almost tender. Every syllable arrived from a different direction. From the floorboards. From the corners of the room where dust pretends to sleep. From the thin space between my heartbeat and my breath. I did not answer. A child learns early, if the dark calls you, you do not call back. But that was only the beginning. The air thickened, tasting of wet iron. My lumen flickered to a dull bruise of light, and in that half-glow the shelves around me seemed to lean closer, their spines like vertebrae. The Auspex screen still pulsed with the same phrase, we see you, but the letters had begun to drift, unmoored from their lines, swimming like fish in deep water. Who are you? I whispered, hating the way my own voice sounded like a trespasser in my mouth. We are the part that knows what you hide from yourself. A second voice braided through the first, softer, almost apologetic. We are what watches when you refuse to look. My skin prickled. The mark on my wrist warmed, then cooled, then warmed again, the way a creature shivers when it wakes. I remembered Magos Ferel's smile, not human, not sane, and fought the urge to run. Run where? Into corridors that had already learned my footfalls. I focused on real things, on the grit under my palm, on the paper's dry rasp beneath my thumb, on the faint hum of the building's ancient generators, steady as an old hymn. I breathed in 4 counts, out 4 counts, a catechism of calm. It helped. A little, then the room exhaled. Shelves widened into a canyon, the ceiling retreating into a dusk-colored firmament. I saw a tide ripple along the stone floor, not water, but minds. Thoughts like translucent eels, streaking through one another, leaving wakes of memory. Faces surfaced in that flow, a guardsman clutching a locket, a sister of battle whispering a name, a child tracing the aquila in spilled grain. Each face opened its eyes as it passed, and looked at me with the same patient recognition. You will do, said the not voices together, and if I refuse, I ask. The question tasted like ash. The warp does not deal in refusals, only in timings. You have already answered, they murmured, and the mark on my wrist throbbed in agreement. I felt something else then, a direction, not a place but a leaning of reality, a tug under the tongue. If I followed it, I knew I would find, not safety, never that, but an explanation, and explanations are a hunger of their own. My feet moved without instruction. The librarium's back wall softened into a vellum curtain. I pushed my hand through and felt cold rain on the other side, though I still stood indoors. The curtain parted with a sound like old parchment tearing, and the corridor beyond revealed itself, narrow, candlelit, made of brick that remembered fire. What they saw next defied logic. Along the hallway, 4 alcoves waited, shallow niches, each occupied by an object that should not have existed in the same world. In the first, a chalice brimmed with wine that steamed as if angry with the cup, the surface trembling to an unheard heartbeat. In the second, a blade lay across velvet, its edge stained with a reflection of things that hadn't happened yet. In the third, A ledger bound in skin ticked like a pocket watch, numbers rearranging themselves as though the future was negotiating its debts. In the fourth, a child's spinning top vibrated without moving, humming a lullaby so close to my mother's voice I nearly wept. I stood between them, compelled and repulsed, as if gravity itself had become a jury. Choose what you fear most, the whispers breathed, and you will understand which doors are yours. And then, the whispers changed. They split into 4 currents, each with its own cadence: seductive warmth, iron command, meticulous hunger, cold inevitability, and the hallway tilted toward revelations I could not carry. My hand lifted, unsteady, hovering between chalice, blade, ledger and toy. Somewhere, far behind the veil, something immense leaned closer to watch. The mark on my wrist opened like an eye, and I realized with a clarity that hurt, that I had not discovered a path. I had been prepared for it. The candle flames bent inward as if the universe inhaled. I reached out, and the world shattered like glass, submerged in sound. The chalice met my hand first. I hadn't chosen it. It had chosen me. The liquid within trembled, then stilled, turning from wine to something thicker, darker, the color of old devotion. The scent struck first, roses crushed beneath iron boots, incense over blood, the perfume of faith misused. My mind blurred. The mark on my wrist burned until it felt carved from light. We begin with desire. A voice, female, infinite, sweet as rot. Every syllable bloomed like silk and suffocation, all at once. My vision bled into rose and gold. The library vanished. I stood upon a field of corpses turned to marble statues, each locked in a moment of ecstasy or agony, and I could no longer tell which was which. We were smiling, and at the center of that silent congregation stood her, Slanesh, the Dark Prince, the end of want. She was beauty made unbearable, forever unfinished. Every blink remade her, a sculpture that sculpted itself with my gaze. Her smile was a wound made elegant. You touched my cup, she whispered. You thirst, little scholar, but not for knowledge. Her laughter rippled across reality, and every statue shuddered as if remembering their pleasures and their deaths. I fell to my knees, but not from fear, from awe. The truth of her presence was too perfect, too symmetrical. Every sound had harmony, every scent a reason to breathe. It wasn't corruption, it was clear, and that terrified me more than madness ever could. You see, she breathed inside my thoughts. Chaos is not evil, it is honesty stripped of mercy. The air rippled, colors folding into each other, pain becoming melody, blood becoming music. Each note carved a truth into my mind. To desire is to move is to consume is to live. And yet, I knew that one more breath in her presence would unmake me into something too beautiful to still be human. I tore my hand back. The chalice screamed, a high crystalline sound that cracked the vision apart. The marble faces shattered into dust. The field collapsed, and I fell backward into the corridor of alcoves once more. My body convulsed, lungs heaving as if I had drowned and clawed my way out of nectar. But that was only the beginning. The whispers shifted, the warmth of her vanished, replaced by the scent of oil, brass and ozone. From the second alcove, the blade glowed faintly red, whispering not with seduction but with purpose. We build through war. The air thickened, pulsing like a forge. I knew whose presence awaited next. Khorne, the Lord of Rage, the god whose silence is broken only by the sound of dying hearts. The chalice faded behind me as the world began to burn again. The forge fire bloomed behind my eyes. Heat rose not from flame, but from memory, the memory of violence etched into the fabric of reality itself. The corridor dissolved into a battlefield where the ground was iron, and the sky was a furnace coughing smoke. I stood ankle deep in ash that once had names. A shadow towered before me, broad, silent, terrible. The air trembled from the weight of its presence. No laughter, no music, only the rhythm of war itself. Khorne, the Lord of Skulls, The Red God, the one who does not speak because rage needs no language. You seek meaning, a voice thundered, not in words but in impact. Every syllable struck like an axe. Meaning is the lie of cowards. There is only truth. The moment when life stops resisting. The blade from the alcove appeared in my hand, alive and snarling. I felt its hunger as my own heartbeat quickened to match its pulse. Every drop of sweat, every gasp, every remembered anger, all of it fed him. My thoughts sharpened into weapons. I saw soldiers on the horizon, Astartes, guardsmen, daemons, all faceless beneath red skies, locked in endless slaughter. They did not fight for victory. They fought because stillness was death, and in their violence I recognized something horrific. Peace was an unnatural state. In every prayer to the emperor, Khorne growled, "They're hiding a whisper of violence." Every vow to protect conceals a desire to destroy. I am not apart from you. I am your reflection when you stop lying. The battlefield stretched into infinity, rivers of blood feeding an ocean that boiled with unending conflict. The roar of 10,000 dying throats merged into something almost sacred. I clutched my head, screaming over the din. "I don't want this." "You already do," the voice replied, calm as murder. "You think fear is purity. It is hunger denied. You fight because you must, mortal. That is my gift, and your curse." I fell to my knees again, but the ground burned my skin. The blood was not blood anymore. It was a memory. I saw the faces of everyone I had ever resented, their deaths replaying endlessly, my hatred fueling the fires. Then, silence. Not the peace of absence, but the silence of completion. Khorne had no need to speak further. His truth was simple, merciless, eternal. "We built through war," the whisper repeated, but now it came from inside me. The blade dissolved into dust, leaving a metallic taste in my mouth. The battlefield melted, colors running like paint in rain, and I found myself once more in the corridor of 4 alcoves. My lungs clawed for air. My heartbeat was a drum that would not still, but that was only the beginning. From the 3rd alcove came a faint scratching paper against bone. The ledger had opened itself, its pages fluttering as if in thought. Numbers bled across the parchment, morphing into shapes, names, destiny. And from its pages, a voice spoke, cold, calm, inevitable. "All things have a cost." Tsinchit noticed me. The ledger's whisper was not like the others. It didn't seduce or command, it reasoned. Every page turned with intent, as if invisible fingers were rearranging the fate of the galaxy one numeral at a time. Ink shifted like mercury, coalescing into a single symbol I could not decipher yet. Somehow I understood it. "You thought desire and rage were primal," the voice said, patient, sharp as glass. "They are mere byproducts. I am the cause. I am the architect behind their noise." The air rippled with intelligence, not warmth, not malice, but design. And then, as if drawn into the folds of thought itself, the corridor dissolved into a horizon of parchment skies and endless machinery. Cogs, the size of planets, turned within one another, powered by minds screaming equations that birthed and destroyed stars. This was the domain of Tsinch, the changer of ways, god of secrets, of futures, of the lie that calls itself hope. I stood on a staircase that had no end. Each step I took reformed beneath my feet, twisting into different material: marble, flesh, fire, crystal, memory. My own shadow broke apart into multiple versions of me, each walking in a different direction, each whispering a question I had never dared ask. "Do you believe you have free will?" The question echoed from everywhere and nowhere. I didn't answer, because deep down I already knew what Sant wanted me to understand, that even my silence had been planned. 1,000 quills wrote across the sky. They inked out timelines that forked endlessly, showing me everything I could be: heretic, martyr, corpse. Each possibility burned away the moment I looked too closely. "Every choice is a thread," the voice continued, weaving through me like a thought I couldn't escape. "Every thread serves the pattern. Even rebellion feeds design." The mark on my wrist shifted again, the eye narrowing into a spiral. I could feel it pulling at my mind, tugging like gravity on reason. Thoughts that weren't mine began to surface. Blue fire, golden masks, eyes blinking from behind reality. The future was alive, and it was watching itself through me. I tried to look away, but there was nowhere to look. The world had become script. The air was writing itself, and I was just another line in the margin of some cosmic journal. "Do you see now?" Cinch murmured, his tone almost kind.
You mortals call us chaos. But we are not chaos. We are the mathematics of eternity, too vast for sanity to solve. The ledger snapped shut. When I opened my eyes again, the corridor had returned. 3 alcoves now stood dim, their light fading like memory. Only one remained alive, the fourth, the spinning top. It hummed softly, and from it came not a voice but a chill. The temperature dropped. Frost spread along the walls like veins of white fire. The air thickened with stillness so complete it silenced even thought. "Entropy awaits," whispered a voice that was not sound at all, and I knew who watched me now. Nurgle, the patient god. The rot beneath mercy, the end that waits with open arms. They say mortals are the pieces on the board of gods, but no, mortals are the board itself. Every thought, every fear, every dream of power redemption becomes a square for chaos to claim. The great game isn't played around humanity, it's played through us. I learned this truth when I saw the eyes of a guardsman during the siege of Cauldress Reach. They were hollow, yet glimmered with something ancient belief twisted backward. He had once prayed for deliverance. Now he prayed to whatever would answer first. The battlefield was nothing but smoke and ruin. I was part of the second line, tasked with documenting morale and transmitting coded reports to the fleet. But as the hours dragged into days, I realized there were no sides anymore, only the slow, patient infection of will. At first the whispers came to the wounded. They'd hear lullabies in the static of the vox, promises of painless sleep, of strength without chains. One by one, their wounds stopped bleeding. But they didn't heal. Their flesh hardened like wax under a black sun. When the Medicae touched them, the corpses smiled. "The Emperor has abandoned us," one whispered as we burned his body. But the others still listen. The words lingered like poison. The men began to chant fragments in their sleep. Things no dialect could shape. Syllables that scraped the mind raw. By the third night, the Vox unit began transmitting on its own. A voice came through, distorted and calm. "Fear not, children of ruin. You are the architects of your own freedom." I thought it was enemy interference, but then I saw the Vox operator's hands, bones pushing through skin, black veins, forming runes that pulsed with living light. He smiled, and his eyes were full of gratitude. "We're winning," he said. "Winning what?" There was nothing left to win, only a sky full of ghosts. I began to understand that chaos doesn't always arrive with claws and wings. It seeps in through the cracks of exhaustion, through prayers left unanswered, through orders that make no sense. It wears your own logic as a mask until you forget whose side you were ever on. When dawn finally came, the battlefield was quiet. The enemy had vanished, but so had half our regiment. Their armor was left behind, arranged neatly in circles as if in ritual. At the center of each circle lay a sigil drawn in ash. The same mark burned beneath my skin. "You will understand soon," the whisper returned. "They are not lost, they are players now." I looked up at the rising sun, and for a moment it looked back, a single lidless eye of light staring down through the smoke. Something moved behind the veil, and I knew the war was never between armies. It was between beliefs. The sun's eye faded, but its afterimage burned inside my skull. For days I couldn't close my eyes without seeing it blink. I tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, as trauma, but every time I wrote a report, the words rearranged themselves into prayer. Belief is the seed of transformation. That line appeared again and again, no matter what I tried to write, and I began to wonder, was it my hand moving, or someone else's will guiding it? They assigned me to accompany a detachment of Astartes soon after.
The Iron Talons, veterans of uncounted crusades, they were supposed to be incorruptible, their minds forged in faith and duty. But corruption doesn't strike like lightning, it seeps quiet as breath. We were sent to purge the ruins where the missing soldiers were last seen. The building's corridors were lined with flickering lumen strips and whispering vents that breathed like lungs. I felt the presence before I heard it, the soft murmur of hundreds of voices all praying in unison. When we reached the central chamber, the truth waited for us. The missing guardsmen stood in perfect silence, arranged like statues around a single figure, an Astartes without heraldry, his armor coated in crimson wax and black ash. He turned toward us slowly, his voice calm, almost priestly. "Brothers," he said, "you have served lies. The Emperor is not your master, he is your mirror. We are not his soldiers, we are his reflection turned inward." The Iron Talons aimed their bolters. I saw hesitation, just a flicker. That was all chaos needed. One heartbeat later, the air screamed. The chamber erupted in violence. Bolter shells, las fire, psychic residue thick enough to taste. But even as the traitor fell, smiling through shattered teeth, I realized something horrifying. None of them had disobeyed their faith, they had fulfilled it. Their devotion had simply found a truer, hungrier God. After the battle, I wandered through the ruins. The floor was slick with ash that pulsed faintly underfoot. I found a single data slate among the rubble, still recording. A voice played through static, female, human, trembling with reverence. They said we were lost. But the warp, it listened. It promised we'd never be alone again. The words cut through me like ice. I looked at the surviving Astartes, their armor scored with runes that hadn't been there hours before. None of them spoke of it. None even seemed to notice. But I did, and the mark on my wrist pulsed in answer, as if pleased.
"You see how easy it is to turn faith?" the whisper cooed. "You call them heretics, but they only loved too deeply." The thought hollowed me, because I knew now that faith, all faith, was the first move in the great game, and every mortal was playing whether they wished to or not. The further I went, the more I realized that belief itself was the battlefield, not the planets, not the armies, but the quiet moments when a mortal looked at the stars and asked why. That question is the crack where chaos enters. Weeks passed aboard the evacuation frigate St. Alaric.
We carried survivors from Caldrus Reach. Soldiers, refugees, psychers, sedated in cryo-caskets. Every corridor smelled of oil and prayer. The air recycling units hummed like a dying choir. I spent most nights awake, listening to the slow pulse of the warp drives, the heartbeat of something far older than metal. The mark on my wrist no longer glowed, but it throbbed in rhythm with the ship's Geller field. I began to notice things, shadows moving against the light, whispers in the intercom when no one spoke. The warp was testing the hull, brushing against the barrier like a cat, tracing the edge of a cage. And then the dreams began again. They weren't mine this time. I saw through the eyes of a navigator chained to his throne of bronze. His third eye burned with starfire, but what it saw wasn't the Imperium storms, it was faces, endless faces, made of thought and agony, pressing against the hull of reality like drowning souls. "We are waiting," they whispered. "The veil is where you sleep." I woke up screaming, but my voice wasn't the only one. Down the corridor, the psycho containment pods flickered, one by one. Their seals broke, the Medicae ran, too late. Each pod burst in a silent bloom of light, leaving behind nothing but whispers, shapes of light that crawled across the walls before fading. The next morning the captain declared a quarantine, but the whispers didn't care about steel. They moved through us instead, through guilt, through curiosity, through the need to believe. By the third day, the crew was no longer obeying orders. They prayed instead, not to the Emperor, but to something else. Something that promised clarity. Their prayers had no words, only rhythm. I could feel it in the pulse of the deck, in the synchrony of footsteps, in the beating of hearts no longer their own. And in that rhythm, I understood the cruelest truth of all. Mortals don't need daemons to fall. They only need to listen long enough to themselves. The game is not played above you, the whisper said from everywhere and nowhere. It is played as you. I stood alone in the chapel of the Saint Alaric, surrounded by icons melting into shapes too fluid for faith. The light of the candles bent toward me like flowers reaching for warmth. The ship trembled. The gala field began to hum off key. Something vast was pressing against the veil, waiting for permission to enter. And somewhere deep in the ship, a child began to laugh. The laughter echoed through the steel corridors, soft at first, a child's voice, distant, innocent. But innocence has no place in the warp. It grew louder, overlapping itself, like many throats speaking through one mouth. Each note carried a tone, mockery, hunger, and something worse, familiarity. The warp was watching us. No, it was entertained. When the gala field finally faltered, it didn't shatter. It peeled, light bent inward, folding upon itself like a dying thought. The void beyond the viewport bled color, crimson, blue, pink and rot green, the four shades of damnation. Shapes formed and dissolved, laughing without sound. I realized then, they weren't invading. They were observing. You struggle so beautifully. A voice purred, layered, ancient, impossible to localize. You build meaning from madness. You kill and pray, and fear, for our delight. I felt them, all of them. Slanacia's gaze caresses the crew's terror, turning panic into music. Corner's presence in every heartbeat quickened with rage. Sancha's hand guiding the engineers' futile repairs, their logic unraveling as the console codes rewrote themselves. And Nurgle, patient Nurgle, whispering comfort to the dying through the vents, promising that decay was only another form of embrace. The ship had become an amphitheater of despair. We weren't dying, we were performing. I ran to the observation deck. The void outside wasn't void anymore. Four colossal silhouettes hung in eternity, their forms shifting, vast and intimate all at once. They weren't separate. They were four reflections of a single will. The warp's desire made self-aware. One of the bridge officers wept beside me. They're playing with us, she whispered, like children with dolls. I wanted to deny it, but as her tears fell, the droplets froze mid-air and rose again, drawn toward the glass. Outside, the warp responded, forming titanic mockeries of our faces across the void. They laughed, and the laughter cracked the ship's hull. Fear them not, the whisper inside me cooed. They do not hate you. They simply play the only game they know, the great game of chaos. I understood now. The gods didn't crave worship. They craved interaction. Every emotion, every decision, every flicker of hope or despair, it was nourishment. Mortals were not prey. We were content, and the warp was their theater. The ship began to twist, metal groaning like an animal in pain. Decks folded upon themselves, crew members merging into one another, flesh sculpted into grotesque parodies of purpose. But amidst the horror, the gods watched with fascination, not fury. Do you see? They murmured in unison. We are the echo of your desires. You wanted meaning. You built us to bear it. The laughter grew again, low and endless, until it felt like the heartbeat of creation itself. And I knew we were never meant to win the game. We were meant to keep playing. The laughter faded into a low hum, not gone, only listening. The gods were watching, waiting for their toys to dance again. The Saint Alaric was no longer a ship. It was a puppet theater strung by thoughts, every corridor an artery feeding the amusement of immortal things. And in that theater we played our roles perfectly. The captain stood upon the bridge, his uniform soaked in sweat and blood. The command sigils blinked crimson across the console, yet he didn't see them. His eyes were locked on something beyond the glass, on a vast hand reaching from the warp, tracing the shape of the vessel like a child outlining a toy. Hold the line, he whispered to no one. They're watching. The vox crackled with 1,000 voices, all his own, his words repeated back, twisted by unseen mouths. They're watching.
They're watching. He drew his bolt pistol and fired into the viewport. The round flattened against reinforced glass, and the gods laughed. I felt it then, not just in sound but in sensation. The laughter became touch, the air vibrating through my bones like the plucking of strings. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the ship's deck melted away. My vision split open, showing me the game from above, the vast mosaic of mortal lives across the galaxy, each moment of faith and fury lighting up the warp like constellations. Millions of light,
billions of screams, and above them all, 4 shadows leaned across eternity, rearranging their pieces. Slanesh pushed a single world toward indulgence. Khorne answered by burning it. Sent smiled, and rewrote the outcome before it happened, and Nurgle waited, patient as rot for the ashes to bloom. I watched civilizations rise and fall in a single heartbeat. Each victory became another's tragedy, each prayer another's curse. Every act of faith echoed into the laughter of the warp. "This is the game," whispered the voice. "All for and none. The only rule is to never stop." I saw something else then, a flicker, a ripple through the mosaic. A single human thought. What if we stopped playing? The laughter ceased. The gods turned their attention toward that thought, horrified, delighted, intrigued. The mortal who thought it burned instantly, his soul unraveling into paradox. But his idea remained. It rippled outward, touching minds across stars, infecting silence itself. What if the game ended? The warp trembled, uncertain for the first time since time began, and for that moment I saw fear. Not in mortals but in gods, because if mortals ceased to feed them, ceased to fight, worship or dream, what would the gods be then? The laughter returned, louder now, but behind it I heard something else, a heartbeat. Mine, still human, still afraid, and in that fragile rhythm, I realized the game could not end, but it could break. The warp convulsed. For the first time, I felt uncertainty ripple through it, a shiver in the infinite. The laughter of the gods faltered, replaced by a low grinding murmur, like tectonic plates of thought colliding. I had touched something they didn't anticipate, the idea of refusal. But ideas are dangerous things here. They don't stay small. Reality around me fragmented into visions. I stood in 1,000 places at once, on battlefields soaked in blood, in cathedrals turned to dust, in the dreams of a dying child whispering to an unseen friend. Every mortal, every mind was a playing piece, but now their collective thought was turning. What if we stopped believing? The gods reacted like predators denied prey. Slanesh wailed in desperate ecstasy, beauty curdling into noise. Khorne's fury became silent so deep it split the soul. Swinch's laughter turned to static, blue fire, collapsing into ash. And Nurgle, he only smiled, the rot deepening, patient as ever. "You must understand," Nurgle crooned through the bones of the ship. "Fear keeps you alive. Resistance keeps you feeding us.
You cannot escape us through will, only through surrender." His words were soft, fatherly, almost kind, and that was what made them terrifying. I stumbled through what remained of the St. Alaric's bridge. The ship hung in a sea of unreality, its hull peeling away like wet parchment. Crew members fused into the walls, their mouths whispering prayers that melted into laughter. And then, beyond the viewport, I saw them, not as gods this time, but as faces carved into the fabric of the void. 4 colossal visages, staring down at me, curious, patient, amused. "Do you see now?" they asked in one voice.
This is eternity. The game is not cruelty. It is continuity. I wanted to scream, to defy them, but there was nothing left to defy with. I thought I was echoing. The mark on my wrist burned with unbearable light, and from it I felt their gaze through me. Suddenly, a flicker, a single heartbeat, mine, steady and small amid the chaos. I clung to it like driftwood in a storm. That rhythm wasn't divine. It wasn't infinite. It was human, finite, fragile, real. The gods leaned closer. "You fear us," they said, "and through that fear you give us shape." I understood then, fear was not surrender. Fear was the definition. To fear chaos was to remember that I was not it, that there was still a line, however thin, between humanity and the abyss. "And so you keep the game alive," they whispered, almost lovingly. "You, who fear us most." The laughter returned, softer now, almost satisfied. The warp folded in on itself, swallowing the ship, the crew, the stars. But through it all, my heartbeat echoed like defiance. The game continued, but for the first time, the gods were watching with interest. Not at my destruction, but at my persistence. When I awoke, there was no sound, no gods, no whispers, only the soft pulse of my own blood, echoing in a space that was not space at all. The warp was gone. Or perhaps I was simply beneath its notice. I stood on what felt like glass, a black surface reflecting nothing. Above me the stars hung in frozen patterns, motionless, mute. Time had stopped pretending to move, and for the first time since I had heard the first whisper, I was alone. The silence was unbearable. I had grown so used to the chaos that its absence felt wrong, like a missing limb. My mind reached for the familiar noise, the cosmic heartbeat of the gods, but there was nothing. Just me. That's when I realized what true fear was. It wasn't terror of pain, or madness, or damnation. It was absent. Without the warp, I couldn't tell where I ended, and the void began. I whispered to hear my own voice. It came out hoarse, small. "Is anyone here?" The void replied, not with sound, but with remembrance. Images surfaced. The chalice, the blade, the ledger, the spinning top, the 4 alcoves of my revelation. Each one now cracked, broken, discarded, and behind them, a 5th alcove. One that had never been there before, empty. This is what remains when the game ends. The voice wasn't divine this time. It wasn't a whisper from beyond. It was my own. I knelt beside the empty alcove, staring into it like a mirror. Within that hollow space I saw what the gods had always known. That fear was the final tether between mortality and madness. So long as we feared them, we remained separate from them. So long as we trembled, we existed. "Fear is not their weapon," the echo said. "It is yours." Every act of defiance, every prayer, every scream on every battlefield, it was all fear, refracted into action. It was the last act of being human in a universe that had forgotten what humanity meant, and that terrified them. The reflection rippled. For a heartbeat, I saw the gods again, diminished, hazy, distant. They watched me not as prey, but as an anomaly. Their amusement had turned to curiosity. For all their power, they could not understand what it meant to fear without worshipping. "You cannot kill what you still fear," Slaanesh whispered faintly. "You cannot fight what you still fear," murmured Korn. "You cannot outthink the pattern you inhabit," chuckled Sinch. "But you can outlast it," said Nurgle, his tone almost proud. And then all 4 faded. Their laughter dissolved into the wind. I stood again, alone. And this time I was not afraid, because fear, I realized, wasn't the end of the game. It was the only thing the gods could never truly take. I began to walk, though there was no ground, no horizon, no destination. Each step echoed like a heartbeat in a tomb. The void shifted beneath me, folding in quiet acknowledgement. I was not escaping the warp. I was walking through its dream, and the dream was changing. I saw them again, the mortals, millions of them scattered across the galaxy. Each soul flickered like a candle against a storm. Some prayed, some cursed, some simply endured. And through all their terror and futility, I saw what chaos had missed. None of them stopped hoping. Not hope for victory. Not even salvation. I just hope one heartbeat lasts longer. That was the warp's great miscalculation. Because even in despair, mortals continued to imagine meaning. They kept fearing. Yes, but fear did not surrender. It was the stubborn will to survive without understanding why. "Do you see?" The echo of my voice asked again, gentler. This time. "This is why they watch. They envy you." And I understood. The chaos gods were infinite, but bound by their own natures. They could never change. Desire will always crave. Rage will always burn. Schemes will always coil back upon themselves. Decay will always smile and wait. But humanity, fragile, finite, fleeting, could choose to fear and still move forward, to know madness and still say no. We were their reflection, but we could blink. The void rippled ahead of me, and from it rose the Saint Alaric, not as wreckage now, but as memory, suspended between existence and forgetting. The bridge lights flickered one last time. I saw the captain at his console, the crew at their stations, the Astata standing tall in defiance. They weren't alive. They weren't dead. They were remembered, preserved by fear. The one emotion even the warp couldn't unmake. The game never ends, a distant whisper said, but its players remember. I walked through them, through shadows of courage, guilt, and endless human contradiction. Each face turned toward me as I passed, and though their mouths did not move, I felt the unspoken unity of them all. We had stared into the abyss, and for a moment, it blinked first. When I reached the far end of the ship, the glass of the viewport began to melt into light. Beyond it stretched the galaxy, vast, cruel, magnificent. A billion worlds, each trembling with the same fragile defiance. The whisper came one last time, softer now, almost reverent. "You have learned the truth, little observer. Chaos is not what destroys humanity. It is what proves it exists." The void around me began to dissolve. I felt my body return. Breath, weight, heartbeat, reality, imperfect and merciful. And as the warp receded into silence, one thought lingered like a prayer. Fear is not our weakness. It is the last thing that keeps us human. I woke to the sound of rain. Soft, rhythmic, impossibly normal. The kind of sound you forget exists when you've spent too long listening to the screams of the warp. I lay there for a moment. No alarms, no whispers, no gods, just the sound of water falling on stone. I didn't know where I was. Perhaps no such place existed, but that didn't matter. The nightmare was gone. Or maybe it was simply learned silence. I sat up slowly, breath trembling. The air smelled of earth and iron, the scent of real life. My reflection shimmered in the puddle beside me, pale, scarred, eyes hollow but awake. The mark on my wrist was still there, but it no longer burned. The eye had closed. It wasn't gone, it was watching differently. And in that quiet, I finally understood the meaning of the game. The great game of chaos was never about domination. It was about continuation. The gods play because they cannot end. Mortals fear because we can. Our endings give their existence shape, the way a shadow proves there is still light.
They are eternal, because we die. We are real, because they don't. I looked to the sky, not the false light of the warp, but the dim gray glow of a real dawn. It felt heavy and cold, but also merciful. I thought of all the souls I had seen consumed, of every voice that screamed in faith or madness, and I realized something that almost broke me. None of it was wasted. Every fear, every desperate prayer, every doomed act of courage, all of it echoed, not in the warp, not to the gods, but within us.
Fear had taught us what it meant to resist, even when resistance was meaningless. To cling to sanity, not because it saved us, but because it defined us. That was the secret the gods could never understand. They could not be afraid, and that was why they would never truly win. I stood, feeling the world tilt beneath my feet. Somewhere, beyond the veil, I could still sense them, faint, distant, restless. Watching, waiting for the game to continue. "You will return to us," a voice murmured from the fading edge of thought. "All mortals do." "Perhaps," I whispered back, "but not yet." The silence swallowed my words like a tide receding from shore. The rain fell harder, and for the first time in what felt like centuries I smiled. a small, fragile human smile, because I knew the truth now. The great game of chaos cannot be won, but it can be endured, and endurance in the face of gods is its own kind of victory. In the end, fear isn't weakness, it's the only thing that keeps us human.